Good afternoon, friends. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all once again for this distinguished lecture series on energy efficiency. This is the 13th in line, which we are having on the first Monday of every month between 4 and 5 p.m. Indian Standard Time. We are privileged to have another thought leader to speak to us today, Dr. Ashok Sarkar. Dr. Ashok Sarkar is a senior energy specialist and team leader, energy efficiency projects at the World Bank at Washington, D.C. Dr. Sarkar is taking this call and delivering this lecture from Washington, D.C. Right now at around 6:15 a.m. Thank you, Ashok, for being present with us at this difficult time. Dr. Sarkar is a senior energy specialist at World Bank's Energy Extractives Global Practice at Washington, D.C. He has been working on clean energy operations for the last 15 years, more than 25 years of professional experience with Asian Development Bank, USAID, and RMA. Has led and participated in several sustainable energy operations in 40 countries, and the overall operations are valued nearly at about $2.5 billion. His main areas of work include energy efficiency, development of super ESCOs, DSM, demand response, solar photovoltaic, electric mobility, green hydrogen, and sustainable cooling. All those topics which are very relevant today and also relevant to energy efficiency, Dr. Sarkar has been involved in. Contribution of Dr. Sarkar has been immense in the last 25 years of his career. Dr. Sarkar currently leads two MENA, Middle East and North Africa regional advisories, one on clean energy transition, the other is on unlocking electric mobility opportunities. Apart from that, he has been involved in several country-specific projects in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Yemen, South Africa, and many other countries. He has been a visiting faculty for the past 20 years at University of Oslo summer program on sustainable energy development. He has been part of some of the panels of UNFCCC, and also he was the chair of UNEP's Global Export Task Force on LED lighting between the years 2015 and 17. Dr. Sarkar is an alumnus of Delhi College of Engineering, India, AIT, Bangkok, and Nelson Institute of Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, USA. Apart from all this, Dr. Sarkar has enormous amount of enthusiasm, and whenever we talk to him, meet with him, discuss with him, something new always comes up. I'm sure some very good ideas will be there for all the listeners today. Without much of further ado, thank you, Dr. Ashok Sarkar, for your presence here today, and I request you to take over the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giri and friends, Mr. Raghupati, Kiran. All of you have been so kind in inviting me to this very important session. I feel honored, and I really would like to thank you on behalf of myself and the World Bank as well, who I represent. I think I'm amongst a lot of friends today. I don't see the names of participants, but I can imagine that I am speaking to people or interacting with friends who I have known for 2 to 3 decades. So it's a real pleasure to be back with many of you. And I'm going to take half an hour perhaps to share some of my thoughts. You might have known some of these facts, might have heard from me or somebody else, but my idea was to really do a little bit of reflection as to why we struggle in the energy efficiency sector, particularly when it comes to large-scale energy efficiency work in not only in India, but in many other parts of the world, and what possibly we are doing right, and what possibly we are doing wrong, and what else we could do more in order to take this agenda forward. So let me try to share the presentation first and see if it comes up. And let me do a check with Giri or others. Can you see the presentation? And let me try to, is the size okay? Okay, great. Great. So I think the idea of this is really to again go over some of the importance of the subject, but also really to find out how we can take it forward in a much more larger scale. And so I would stress more on the how part than the what part and the why part. The why part of energy efficiency is very well known. And as I'm showing in the slide here, it's quite obvious that to achieve what we all want to achieve as as a humanity all over the planet, and not just India, but in other countries, deep decarbonization is not possible if we don't look into renewable energy and energy efficiency. And more so, we're also finding that electrification through renewable energy will become one of the mainstays of future decarbonized world. So when it comes to what we have done so far, transport, industry, and buildings, and I know there are lots of industry representatives in this fora, uh, quite obviously are big elephants in the room. They're places where I see a message saying that somebody cannot see the slides clearly. Perhaps this person who is not able to see may want to log out and log back in. That might help in seeing the slides more clearly, I think.
We are able to see the slides clearly, Ashok. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So I think the 1.5 degrees Celsius targets really requires a lot more aggressive efforts between now and 2050, just 30 years period. Otherwise, we are going to have some sort of permanent, as we call it, damage to the planet, which will be irreversible. Now, within the short-term decarbonization options, obviously renewable energy with and without storage, battery electric vehicles, etc., are big options. But energy efficiency is a much more cross-cutting option, which can really bring in benefits of 40 to 50% of the projected GHG emissions in the next 30 years. We are talking about other options like blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. Hydrogen is just a carrier. It's not the energy source itself. And that, of course, will help in this direction, but it's still the costs and the technologies are about a decade away from where we will see what we see solar and energy efficiency today. In fact, energy efficiency, cost effectiveness was there even 3 decades ago. I know some of you who were connected on the line know that India set up its own energy efficiency charter and mandate with old institutions, even before the Bureau of Energy Efficiency came into picture, PCRA and other organizations after the 1973's oil crisis. And so technologies were there. The fact that energy efficiency can do no harm, but a lot of benefit on energy security was always known. Of course, the climate dimension of it came with later on when the world really got worried about 3 decades ago that we need to take care of the planet, not just keep using energy. So if you look at the projections, and these projections come from various think tanks, international organizations. This is one from the IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, which released its energy transition report last month. Quite clearly on the left-hand side figure, bottom figure, you see you have to do a lot in transport, buildings, and industry. Of course, power plants on the supply side needs to be also taken care of. Hydrogen will come in 2050, but still it's going to be a lot of renewable energy based direct electrification, and that electricity to be used in transport, in energy, in industry and other sectors to replace the thermal energy usage in those sectors. Let me go to the next slide to again reiterate the fact which all of us very well have known for decades, that energy efficiency is financially very attractive. Most of the megawatts, the negative megawatts, are much cheaper than the supply side options of megawatts. Even if you look at the cheapest of the solar and the cheapest of the wind power today, still energy efficiency comes out as even lower than that when it comes to the large scale deployment and the benefits. And beyond the costs, why do we call it money lying on the street, right? I mean, you've often heard the term, it's the cheapest fuel, the first fuel. Nowadays, you hear energy efficiency as a jobs machine. And all those benefits are there. They're not just on paper, but many industries in India, many of the members of CII, for instance, have done a wonderful job in actually capturing this financially attractive energy resource of the first fuel. I often try to track the awards which are given by CII every year to various industries. And when you look at them, those industries are doing those projects in energy efficiency, not just for getting the awards, but that makes financial sense to them. It helps their board members to understand that energy efficiency is indeed the first fuel. And therefore, they adopt those in larger scale. And so the negative, the financial attractiveness of this resource is very well known in the industry sector. What's also happening is there's a lot of other benefits which are now people realizing should have been added to energy efficiency list of benefits and would make it even more attractive. For instance, it reduces consumer energy bills. Consumers can then spend that money, either it be a government consumer or an individual consumer or an industrial consumer, can use that funds which they save for other productive purposes. Of course, it helps at the national budgeting level and the fiscal level. Competitiveness of industries are there. Jobs, which is becoming a big issue, especially after the COVID crisis of almost 18 months now, that we have lost 250 million jobs worldwide. Many more jobs are probably going to be lost in the next 6 to 12 months because of the disruption which has taken place. And energy efficiency yet really keeps working as a jobs machine. In the United States, for instance, over 2.5 million jobs are there in energy efficiency, people employed. It's one of the highest energy employers in the country, in the US. Same in Europe. So it's a very big benefit which we need to capture and recognize and acknowledge while we design energy efficiency projects and while we design energy efficiency policies. Similarly, of course, there are other cross-sectoral benefits. It helps the education sector, health sector, transport sector, in addition to the GHG emissions reduction, which is our fundamental objective at the moment as human beings. We want to save the planet. Just to go on the jobs a little bit, if you look at the numbers, 3 times more jobs can be generated in energy efficiency as well as in renewable energy with the equivalent amount of investment which you make in fossil fuels. And these are direct and indirect jobs. So these are numbers on the left-hand side figure, which comes from an analysis of the post-COVID recovery packages of the European Union and other countries, where it clearly shows that the jobs in the buildings retrofit sector, industrial energy efficiency sector, electric mobility, energy storage, street lighting, and whatnot are much higher. The multipliers are much higher compared to the same amount of investment which can be made in the fossil fuel sector. The power plants, which are traditional coal-fired power plants, or even CCGT, etc. Also, that's the reason why you see, if you look at the share of energy efficiency is quite substantial in the post-COVID recovery stimulus packages around the world. And today, energy efficiency employs over 10 million people, and it can really employ another 25 million by 2030, which is the next 9 years, according to many of the estimates which we have seen. The World Bank also has been carrying out some of the jobs analysis for the Middle East region, for instance, at the moment, and we are finding similar numbers for Morocco, for Egypt, even for countries like Yemen, which is going through conflict. You see a lot more jobs can be produced if the countries shift from fossil fuels to energy efficiency and renewable energy in these countries. And these are net jobs. We're not talking about jobs only being lost, but more jobs being added. Of course, it will require skilling and reskilling and training, and those need to be put in place, as we have been discussing with many of the education institutes and educational leaders around the world. There is a gap there, that green skilled workforce need to be paid more attention. What we need in the next 10 to 15 years for delivering energy efficiency and renewable energy would require a lot more green skilled workforce, which we don't have today. And I think there is a need for organizations like the CII to really collaborate very, very closely with the academic and training and professional training institutes in India to make sure that energy efficiency training and renewable energy training and e-mobility training and green hydrogen training and the research part of it is mainstreamed into the academia, into the engineering programs, into the master's programs, into PhD, but also into the technician training program, and also to the perhaps to the tertiary and secondary training programs. So there is a need for thinking about it in a much bigger way than we have done so far. Again, what we have seen that in spite of all these big benefits and attractiveness and financial viability, the total investment in energy efficiency, even worldwide, has been quite limited. 250 to 300 billion dollars have been spent on an average every year on energy efficiency on the demand side across lighting, across transport, across industry, across buildings. And there are leaders, of course. North America has a big share, just like Europe has an even bigger share, and Chinese are doing quite a bit. Other countries, including India, have done a lot of these investments have been primarily in building sector, relatively less in industry sector. If you look at the diagrams which are shown here, the green numbers are the bottom right-hand side graph are buildings. The blue numbers are transport, and the lighter blue number is industry. So relatively speaking, less investments in industry so far, whereas there's a lot $1 trillion investment every year to be done in these sectors to be able to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So there is a gap. 4 times leverage, 4 times investment is required to really achieve what we want to achieve in the next 30 years. Otherwise, it will be a bit too late. Why does not then it happen? In spite of all the benefits, in spite of all this gap which we have, in spite of the need for finance, why doesn't money flow into this sector the way we hope it should? It is because demand-side energy efficiency really is a very complex issue, much more complex than building power plants, as we all know. When we talk about money lying on the street, it's not the big money which is lying on the street. It's the small amount of small demand-side measures, which is shown in the middle column, which lies on the streets. To collect that money and to package it is much more difficult than to much fewer stakeholders, standardized solutions. Also, this market on the supply side is less diverse. It's much more homogenized, and therefore it results in a much less transaction costs, and it's based on assets and revenues. Whereas on the demand side, these are small and dispersed, multiple stakeholders. There is no single solutions oftentimes, and higher transaction costs. These small amounts of money, the 10 rupee notes, how do you collect them? How do you stack them? How do you manage them? How do you make it easier to handle them? Is where energy efficiency comes in. I say the art and science of energy efficiency packaging and implementation is where on the right-hand side column. You can stack them, you can bundle them, you can aggregate them. And we know the good story about how EESL has aggregated these small demand side measures and stacked them so that they can overcome the barriers which are shown here. So this is what we are still facing. And therefore, one also has to look back and see, is financing the only solution? Decades. But why were they not used? Was it only because of financing? No, because it also requires a lot more ecosystem-based approach, a multi-pronged approach. That there are some network problems. So can Raghupati or Giri just confirm that it's fine?
No, sorry, Ashok. Last minute or so, we lost you. You spoke about is financing the only option. That was the time where we lost your connection and we couldn't hear after that.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, the slide is visible, but your video and audio were coming in and out.
So we were in this slide, right?
Yes, we were in the slide.
Now you can see the slide, right?
The slide is visible, Ashok. Yes, only your audio was cut out.
Oh. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes, now.
Sorry for that. I don't know what's going on. Please do let me know if you stop hearing me.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, please do interrupt me and let me know. So as I was, I think, talking about financing in the previous slide and going over to this to show that there is a need for what we call the 5 pillars of energy efficiency to really move this very complex ecosystem to a larger scale implementation. And just financing alone and technologies alone is not going to solve the problem. We need the right policies and regulations, which India has. Institutions, of course, which is there in India to a large extent, both on the government side, on the public, as well as the private side. And of course, we need a lot of technical capacity, which of course, India is one of the leaders in having that capacity. And information and awareness amongst the stakeholders, and not just the consumers, but the ESCOs, the end users, and the government policymakers. Everybody needs to know what's the benefit in addition to the finance. Now, when it comes to financing, there are multiple ways of financing energy efficiency, and the World Bank, which I represent, of course, is doing this. This is our, what we may call even the bread and butter of the work of the bank. The idea is to not just put in money from the public sector and see that energy efficiency is done, but really to make the best use of that public money to leverage what I say the private sector commercial financing. Because what did I say in the beginning? That we need four times more money. We are spending $250 billion in the total around the world. We need to spend $1 trillion. That extra money is not going to come from public sector. It has to come from private sector. So the private sector capital has to be unlocked to be able to achieve the kind of numbers we are talking about. I'm not going to go into the details of some of these mechanisms of financing. These are what we call the ladder approach. Depending upon which country you are in, which sector we are looking at, what is the market maturity, what is the maturity of the financing system, one would decide then that which kind of mechanism for financing would be more appropriate. So if you really try to do private sector ESCO development in a country where you don't have the basics, it will be difficult. Similarly, if you're going into a new country which has done nothing in terms of a small, let's say, island state in Africa, or even a big country in South Asia, where not much has been done, what do we need to do? You need to look at the basic ways of financing, grants, utility demand side management, or what we also call utility on-bill financing. Mode of the market, based commercial financing and private financing, and not just depend on public and concessional financing. Because at the end of the day, energy efficiency is a commercial and a viable value proposition. It does not need continuous amount of concessional funds because these are cost-effective projects. It really needs some sort of a trigger which helps demonstrate that these are cost-effective, and then let the market take over and the private sector take over. That's the whole idea. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time because we will otherwise run out of time. But I have a few slides which I was going to show you about these different steps of the ladder. Demand side management is one way. The revolving fund is another option. And of course, ESCOs, which many of you are connected on the line, I understand, is yet another option where either through a shared savings model or a guaranteed savings model, you could bring in much larger scale implementation of efficiency through technical and financial services, which the ESCOs can provide. And again, this is done through performance contracting approaches. And there are simplified approaches of measurement and verification, which are emerging, like you know about the deemed savings program, which many of the ESCOs are adopting around the world. But ESCOs, again, is not the panacea and not the only solution, because ESCOs do face a lot of challenges, including some of your member ESCOs of CII. And again, if you look around the world, the performance of the ESCOs have been mixed. China, because of various reasons, ESCO industry does very, very well. Lots of incentives are put there. United States is one of the leading parts of the world, as well as European Union. But if you look at the experience in Brazil, Mexico, even India, and South Africa and others, these are large emerging countries, but yet, even though they started the ESCO development years ago, decades ago, they still face many of these challenges. And therefore, the concept of super ESCO came in. In India, EESL, for instance, leads this mandate. Of course, EESL is not a true super ESCO in many ways because it is actually doing a lot of public sector ESCO projects themselves. True super ESCO, in many cases, is where they actually bring in the smaller ESCOs onto their fold, like it is shown in the left-hand side diagram. And they become the intermediary to help the private ESCO market do more business by becoming the risk taker to some extent, by demand aggregation, by financing, by standardization, while working with the consumers, which are mainly public sector consumers. And we have seen this happening in not just in India, but in many other countries. I have some examples here of the Armenia R2E2 fund, or the FedESCO in Belgium, the Etihad ESCO in UAE, and the Tarshid Super ESCO in Saudi Arabia really tries to do what I said in the previous slide on the left-hand side, is that trying to help the private sector ESCOs thrive and get more business and do more investments. And some of these projects we have been involved with, particularly the Armenia and the Tarshid program, was developed with the help of their and okay,
Ashok, sorry, we lost you for a few seconds in between. Could we try turning off the video? That may reduce the bandwidth demand from your side.
Yes, I think that might be the option. Let us see. Let me try to turn off the video. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, maybe it's the bandwidth. I don't know. Yeah, do let me know if it happens again. So with the various policy framework and institutional framework has been in place in India, and a lot of initiatives which are quite dedicated, quite well thought, quite targeted. either on the financing side or on market development or on the utility side of the equation, as well as the industrial PAT, has been in place in India. We the bank have been trying to look at, so then why is still there so much potential to be tapped? And again, not just with India, but with other countries as well. So we do what we called regulatory indicators for sustainable energy analysis for over 110 countries around the world every 2 years. It's more of a benchmarking mechanism and a approach where we compare different countries with their peer countries and with the best available, case example from, let's say, from Japan or from Europe, in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, energy access, and now also includes clean cooking. And this is done through what we call a traffic light system. A green traffic light, a green score means a country is really doing quite well in setting up the 5 pillars which I showed before: the regulations, the policies, the institutions, the technical capacity, the awareness, and the financing mechanisms. And the countries which are not doing as well get the red score, the red traffic light. So you see many of these countries in Africa are still in red. India is thankfully green when it comes to efficiency, but many of the countries in Latin America are also in red and yellow, which means they still have a long way to go when it comes to the right policies, the right institutions, the right laws, the right governance systems, and the right kind of financing mechanisms available. Score on a scale of 0 to 100, which is very, very good. And this is a little bit of a more detailed deep dive. If you look at the right-hand side top figure, the left-hand side figure, which shows this number 61, 58, 86, are an aggregate of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and access composite scores. But below that, on the right-hand side, where it shows energy efficiency with a circle of 91, is what India got. Why? Because India already has most of the elements of the policy, financing, and institutional pillars which are required to see success in energy efficiency. The only thing where India gets a lower score is 59, is on the building energy codes. The building energy codes are there, but they're not being implemented in India at the state level, for instance. And therefore, they get a lower score. But rest of them, India has made a lot of advances, relatively speaking again, compared to other countries. So on the right-hand side, top figure shows the comparison with Asian countries. Of course, India is the leader beyond the global average and the regional average, which are shown in the red dotted line and the blue solid line, the vertical lines. India gets a score of 91. But even compared to the OECD world, which is shown below, from Australia through United States, these countries which are listed, including Korea, Japan, Norway, Poland, Portugal, of course, Germany, France. India's score of 91 doesn't look that bad because most of these countries, except for the Netherlands, have lower scores than even India. So if you look at this snapshot of where India is in terms of regulatory indicators and institutions, policies, and financing, it's doing quite well. The challenge there is really what happens from when we go from the central level to the state level. And this report came out last year, which I'm sure many of you were part of, may have even contributed to, clearly shows that when you look at the potential, which is, an incredibly high number in the next 30 years, it shows 100, one which can be saved. But yet at the state level, when you go down, except for a few states, and of course, in this particular case, we saw Kerala, Haryana, Karnataka, Telangana, they came out as the leaders. Many states have still not been able to translate the federal central policies and mechanisms and systems into actions and implementation on a larger scale across the buildings, industry, and municipality and transport sector in their states. And there is still a lot more to be done. And industry, again, is faring well in some states, but not in every state. And that's also a big potential to be tapped into. Yet there are some success stories. India did save, according to the estimates which were, published by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, they did save some of the um, 0.73, MTOE is not what you will need to save that big, incredibly large number of, which is shown in this table on the right-hand side. So naturally, there's a long way, a lot more to be done. Again, on the lighting as an example, and there is street lighting, there is water pumping, there is industrial motors, there are other areas where India has done, but lighting as an example, India has done incredibly well, right? Over 360 million LED lamps deployed just by ESL alone. And of course, the market has done its own. So these are very large numbers, even though India is a very large country, but still a lot of impacts is already taking place. 10,000 megawatts have been saved, according to the ESL website, just because of the lighting deployment. So all this is happening, but yet, as I showed in the previous slide, there's a long way to go in many of the other state level, particularly activities where we need to pay more attention. Again, in the interest of time, I probably have about 5 minutes. I would skip these slides, but just to show you that we have been in the bank, as many of you are aware, and many of you are connected, who have been working on these projects. The World Bank has been supporting in the last, I would say, 6-7 years. One of the prominent projects is the PRSF project, the Partial Risk Sharing Facility project, which some of my colleagues are connected, I think, on the line today, who manage this project. SIDBI and ESL and Bureau of Energy Efficiency are our partners in this project, which really has done, again, wonderful performance in the last 3 years in particular. We have been able to leverage almost 55, and in fact, the number is a little higher today because these numbers are from last month, but from the month of March, for the month of early May and late April, there are more projects. There are 5 more projects which have been added to the portfolio of PRSF project. Instead of 29, we have about 35 projects today. But even looking at these projects, you see $55 million was leveraged by spending only $17 million of PRSF guarantees, by bringing projects in ESCO sector, particularly with medium-sized and small ESCOs, many of whom are members of CII in various sectors and using various technologies, just proving the fact that energy efficiency is really a no-brainer and a win-win business if it can be done right, if the right policies are there, if the right mechanism is there, if the right financial incentives are there, and if you have the right templates and documentation to do such projects. There are over 15 banks now participating in PRSF. Some of the biggest names in India are part of our PRSF project, including the State Bank of India, of course, and many of the major banks. Website, of course, gives a lot of details. On the Super ESCO side, we have been working with the public Super ESCO ESL, similarly trying to help them bring more of the impact through their lighting programs, through their ceiling fan programs, through their street lighting programs, and to help them leverage more funding from the private capital market to do even more. And again, there are certain advantages of having a Super ESCO, and there are, of course, certain room for doing private ESCO projects as well. So both models need to exist in any country like India, which is a large country with a lot of potential. And again, Super ESCO has brought its benefits of really being able to bring down the cost of energy efficiency even further, making it even more attractive than what I said in my first slide, that there are very attractive projects, but you can make it even more attractive. So in my opinion, what we have seen is that India is really doing very well on policies and regulations and technical capacity. Where there are some gaps and a little bit more needs to be done are the other 3 pillars. the institutional framework, the financing, and the information and awareness and the database and that kind of work. And I know in the recent months, even Niti Aayog has got involved in this business, where they came out with a database of energy consumption and energy statistics to be tracked and maintained. We know that Bureau of Energy Efficiency has been doing this quite a fine job in tracking some of the performance of the Indian demand-side management, demand-side energy efficiency markets. And we know a lot of financing is coming in now, as I showed, even private sector banks and commercial banks are getting involved in this business. But yet there's room for that. The policies are in place. The room for that is really to bring down that policy implementation at the state level. And I know some of your states which you represent are leaders. As I said, Telangana, Kerala, and others have really shown how to do it. There are other states which are lagging behind, which needs to follow suit. And then it can be achieved. Just my last 3 minutes to say that, within this big picture, what we are seeing is a lot of emphasis and a lot of importance of one of the biggest end users, which is going to become even bigger over the next 2 decades, is cooling. Now, one statistics, India is a country where less than 10% people have air conditioners. Guess what? United States, it's 95%. China, it's over 80%. And so if you really think that we will become one day, like, in terms of standard of living and comfort levels, etc., taken into account, and the increasing incomes, like one of those countries, we still have 90% more of the penetration required for air conditioners in the country. So that's a very big number. And these comes in different forms and shapes. And they're not just air conditioning. We're talking about cold chain, which is becoming even more important. Nowadays, you hear about vaccine cold chains becoming a big issue, and maintaining the temperatures of the vaccines, some of which require -70, -80 degrees Celsius temperature ranges. And of course, food cold chain. And there is, of course, refrigeration at homes and industries and in offices. So this is a very big sector, which I think is getting more attention because of 2 reasons. One, it has energy efficiency benefits. Second, it has a benefit of looking at switching refrigerants which have low global warming potential. So the non-HFC refrigerants can bring in even more reduction. So look at the last bullet. Cooling accounts for 10% of the global GHG emissions. And we can save, and much of these emissions come from, as I said, the energy part of the cooling, but also the refrigerants, which are high global warming potential. So there is an opportunity for us to really build our cooling systems, 90% of which has not yet been built in buildings, in industries, and whatnot, to build it right, to do it right so that we do not lose our food, we live comfortably, we have higher level of thermal comfort, and therefore India is obviously considered one of the top countries by the global community where this work needs to be done. We recently saw the Global Cooling Prize being announced last month or last week, where Daikin, our India's Daikin, actually was one of the winners. So congratulations to them if they are joined on this call. But this also shows that it is possible to do it right. If right technologies are emerging, if you can put the other 5 pillars in place, the policies, the financing, the awareness, technical capacity, and the institutions, including ESCOs, then this cooling potential can be achieved. And we can and we can almost lead the world and showcase how to do it right. And this will have multiple benefits. As I said, food loss in India is a very big issue. We are seeing that with the vaccine loss nowadays in some pockets of India. And productivity loss is because of the heat is something which is going to be worrisome in the future when the temperature of the planet will go up a little bit. What do? We will need more and more cooling. So this is an important aspect which one needs to keep in mind. Delhi numbers are incredibly high. This really shows a little bit of that. I'm going to skip it. This is the India Cooling Action Plan, which the government of India has really showcased and shown the world how to do it right, how to look at different sectors, setting up the stage for doing work in space cooling, technologies, cold chain, even transportation, air conditioning, and refrigeration, as well as research and development. Lots of potential areas of work which the energy efficiency community, including the CII community, needs to get involved with in this space. While we do this, this is my very last slide to show that what is happening with the energy sector. Some of us, who are old enough to remember the 1980s and even late 1970s, the energy sector looked very different. We had an electric utility or a supplier of energy and a buyer of energy, which was consumers, and transmission distribution lines, gas pipelines, oil pipelines. That's about it. But what's happening with the sector is that we have electric vehicles coming online. So transportation is becoming electric. We have digitalization coming in a big time. So earlier, what we used to do now can be done in microseconds and milliseconds without even you getting involved, all electronically, because of the ICT revolution which has taken place in India and outside of India. We also have democratization taking place, which means consumers are getting more and more control of the system. So if consumer puts in a rooftop solar PV system or a solar water heater, it's really detached itself away from the utility. And therefore, the kind of energy efficiency intervention you will look at will not be conventional the way we used to look at before. It will be a different kind of energy efficiency interventions. Similarly, energy storage, batteries are becoming very popular, at least in the United States and in Europe and in Australia, where consumers are installing their own storage batteries because it's becoming cheaper. And of course, there's a lot of demand response and demand side management options because of smart metering and smart grid, which are emerging. So in this 5 megatrends, which I call disruption of demand, decarbonization, distribution and decentralization of sources, democratization and digitalization, is really going to unlock a lot more energy efficiency opportunities in the future. They'll be very different from what you have today. They'll be require different financing strategies. They will require different kind of policies. They'll require perhaps different kind of combination of aggregation of technologies. When ESCOs are going out, they're not just going to go out and build HVAC systems, but they're probably going to offer HVAC system, rooftop solar, solar water heater, electric vehicle charging point, etc., etc. So the whole business models are changing in energy efficiency as we go forward. And we as a community, particularly the industrial community of CII, needs to keep that in mind, that the innovation is yet to come in terms of policies, business models, financing, etc., when you look at these 5 mega trends which are taking place in this. So all this work which I've presented here really comes from the World Bank work in various countries. I work in 10 countries at the moment, but there are many of my colleagues who are working around the world. And this is really thanks to all of them and the lessons that we have learned from various colleagues and various projects that we've been working on the financing side, on technical assistance, on advisory, that we have been able to develop this kind of thinking. Lessons learned, of course, are all captured here. I am not going to repeat this because I said this during my presentation. This presentation will be available with you, of course, but let's keep all these points in mind as we go forward. Banks are important, ESCOs are important, so are policies important, but also both keep in mind that both public and private finance, and even more of private financing, capital market mobilization will be required. And of course, keeping in mind that energy efficiency is not as it used to be. It is really becoming multi-sectoral, really becoming more diverse, really diversifying and disrupting in terms of how you bring in cooling and electric vehicles and storage, etc., etc. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to my friends in CII.